Welcome, everyone, to today's Tech Talk deep dive using the objectives hierarchy in the Microsoft Business Process Catalog. My name is Rachel Profit, and I will be moderating and demoing for you today. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. If you do not consent to being part of a recorded session, please disconnect your line. We encourage you to use the Q&A panel at any time to ask questions regarding to content or to request support. At the end of the session, please don't forget to respond to our survey. We appreciate your feedback as we use this information to improve future events. Presenting for us today from the Microsoft Corporation, we have Mandy Tovez. Mandy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome everybody. Today's agenda will focus on 4 key things. The session is not about product features or implementation steps. It's really about objectives. So we're going to talk about the importance of objectives, recommended practices for documenting them, and then Rachel will be doing some demos in Azure DevOps and Mavim. All right, we're going to start by discussing the importance of objectives in a project. Many teams struggle to articulate their project goals beyond implementing a system. A clear objective transforms a technology deployment into a business initiative. When objectives are vague or absent, scope creep increases, stakeholder alignment erodes, and success becomes subjective. Success by design places objectives at the beginning of every engagement. One thing I like to remind organizations of is that implementing a new technology system should not mean reinventing and making new business objectives. The business objectives and drivers should really already exist within your organization. They are the signals that your C-level team is monitoring and watching and discussing with everyone at any chance they get. This does not mean that the IT team and business teams should not have specific short-term or even long-term goals to support the technology transformation. But most of the goals should be actual business goals and drivers. As we just talked about, objectives are important, and with your organization, they should form a hierarchy from strategy all the way down to the sprint level. We're going to go deeper into this later, into the types of objectives, so we're just going to touch on it now, and you're going to get a little bit of repeated information today because objectives are so important. So at the top level, executives define what business value looks like. Your program or project managers will then translate that into project scope goals with measurable criteria. The consulting from your partner or your business analyst team internally then works with each department or work stream to define the specific goals and objectives that they want to meet that align to the overall executive objectives. Sprint teams then break those into actual actionable deliverables. The key thing to think about here is traceability. If a sprint task cannot trace upward to a business objective, its priority should be questioned. If we don't work on tasks that tie to the business objective, it could prevent the project from delivering on time, being on budget, and it leads to outcomes where our business sponsors are asking, did this really achieve what we needed? I'm going to read this first statement on the slide because it's really important. Success is measured by validating impact, not just confirming completion. A delivered feature is not a delivered outcome. This is the mindset shift Success by Design asks of every team. Completion of a feature does not equal success. New workflow deployed with low user adoption means the project delivered technically, but the business objective was not met. Outcome-driven delivery means defining success measures upfront, like adoption rate or process cycle time, error reduction, then validating those outcomes continuously throughout the project. And we're going to talk about that more. Okay, so now that we have a solid foundation of why our objectives are so important in the Success by Design framework, let's talk more about the recommended practices for tracking these objectives. We've organized this into three main best practices. So the first one, and this one sounds obvious, but almost everyone gets it wrong. It's making sure your tooling is the system of record for objectives. Here's what I mean. Many of us have been on projects where the objectives were documented in a nice PowerPoint at the kickoff, maybe a Word document or a spreadsheet. Everyone agreed on them. And then that document lived on someone's SharePoint site or on their desktop even, and was never opened again. Yeah, that's the norm, not the exception. The problem with offline artifacts is that they're static. The moment you share that document, it's already out of date. And what happens next is even worse. People start creating their own versions. The PM has a spreadsheet, the business lead has a slide deck, the partner has their own tracker. Now you've got 3 different versions of the truth, and half your steering committee meeting is spent arguing about which one is right. The fix is simple in concept. Move your objectives into your delivery tooling. Whether that's Azure DevOps, Mavim, or whatever platform you're using, the point is that objectives should live right next to the work items that support them. Here's why that matters. When objectives are linked to work items, progress tracking becomes automatic. You don't need someone to manually update a status column every Friday. You can see in real time how sprint work is rolling up to the project goals. I worked with a team that made this switch mid-project, and the first thing their steering committee sponsor said was, "This is the first time I actually trust the status report." That's the difference between a static artifact and a live system of record. So take away this. If your objectives aren't in your delivery tool linked to the actual work items, they're probably already out of date. Okay, so the next best practice. Once your objectives are in your tooling, the next question is, how often are you actually looking at them? Track continuously, not point in time. Let's paint a picture. A lot of organizations treat objective tracking like a quarterly report. You check in at a toll gate or a phase gate review, someone pulls together a status deck, and for a brief moment, everyone has visibility to where we are right now. But then what? You go dark for another 6 to 8 weeks until the next review. And if you look at this chart, that's exactly what it shows. With point-in-time tracking, that's the line that keeps dipping. You get these huge blind spots between reviews. You might have high visibility at sprint 1 and 4 when you do your actual checkpoints, but in between, nobody's paying attention, nobody's watching. Now compare that to continuous tracking. The line that stays consistently high. When you weave objective reviews into your regular delivery cadence, visibility stays steady and there are no surprises. Here's a real example. I was working with a team that was tracking a user adoption objective, but they only reviewed it at a phase gate. By the time they got into the UAT gate review, adoption signals were already way off track, but nobody had noticed because no one was looking between milestones. They ended up having to extend the project by 2 sprints just to course correct. If they'd been checking objective health at every sprint review, even just a few minutes at the end, they would have caught that drift early and adjusted. So the recommendation is straightforward. Embed a brief objective health check into your existing sprint reviews and steering committees. Use leading indicators tied to your objectives, things like training completion rates or process adoption metrics, to surface early warnings before the lagging results confirm failure. Don't wait for the toll gate to find out you're off track. Okay, so our third best practice, and honestly, this is the one I think teams struggle with the most, is evolving your success measures during delivery. Here's what typically happens. At the start of a project, you sit down with your sponsors and define success measures. Maybe it's something like reduce order processing time by 30%, or achieve 90% user adoption within 60 days of go live. Great. Everyone nods, and then nobody touches them again until go live. But here's the thing. Those initial success measures, they're hypotheses. They're based on assumptions you all made before the project started, before you really understood the data, the processes, the people involved. A quick example. I worked with a team that set a goal to reduce their invoice processing cycle from 10 days to 3. Sounds reasonable, right? But once they got into delivery and actually mapped the process, they realized the real bottleneck wasn't the system. It was an approval chain that involved 5 people. So the right success measure shifted from cycle time to approval automation rate. If they'd stuck with the original metric, they would have optimized on the wrong thing. And I want to be really clear here. Updating your success measures is not scope creep. It's reasonable adaptation. You're learning as you deliver, and your measures should reflect that. What we recommend is revisiting your success measures at every major milestone and formally revalidating them with your sponsors at every phase transition. Think of it as a cycle. You define, you deliver and learn, you refine and realign, and then you reassess. It's continuous. So treat your success measures like they're carved in stone. Treat them like living targets that get sharper as your understanding deepens. Okay, now we have that foundation of what our objectives are, why they're important, best practices for tracking them. Let's get real and talk about how you can actually use them in your project. Okay, this slide is very busy, but we want to show you just the overall business process catalog structure and how it relates in a tool like Mavim or Azure DevOps. We're focused today on objectives, and the objectives tree in your project tracking tool is where your team can document your project goals and business outcomes, essentially defining what success looks like for your implementation. It allows teams to align work with their strategic outcomes and clearly document your objectives across different levels of the project. Now, when you first deploy the catalog into your Azure DevOps or Mavim, you'll notice that the objectives tree is organized into a predefined folder structure. This structure is provided as a starting point. That's it. And it helps you quickly begin organizing your project objectives at the executive, the program, the project, the sprint level. However, it's important for you to remember that this folder structure is not intended to be rigid or prescriptive. At the beginning of your project, we strongly recommend that customers and partners update the objectives tree folder structure so that it really aligns with your own organizational model, whether that's based on business units, product lines, regions, or functional teams. Okay, I told you earlier we're going to just touch on the hierarchy of objectives. Now we're going to really go into what each of the objectives are. So within that objectives tree we've just looked at, we organize the project goals into 4 distinct types of objectives. And you can think of these as operating at different altitudes within your organization. At the highest level, we have your executive objectives. These are the strategic transformation goals that often originate outside of the project itself. Things like improving customer experience, increasing operational efficiency, or enabling a shift to more data-driven decision-making. Executive objectives ensure that the implementation is not just delivering new technology, but contributing to broader business outcomes and long-term transformation priorities. Below that, we have our project objectives. These are more focused and typically aligned to specific functional areas such as sales, service, finance, or supply chain. Our project objectives define what success looks like within the scope of the implementation. For example, reducing manual processes, increasing automation, or improving visibility into key business operations. And as we move further down toward delivery, we introduce program increment objectives. These help align priorities across implementation phases and ensure that teams are progressing toward measurable outcomes over time. They provide a structured way to break larger project goals into deliverable improvements that can be planned and validated across multiple sprints and work streams. And finally, at the most tactical level, we have our sprint objectives. These are going to focus on near-term outcomes that can realistically be delivered within a sprint cycle, helping teams stay aligned on what they're working toward in the immediate future and ensuring that day-to-day work supports our higher-level objectives. When these 4 layers are defined and connected within the objectives tree, they create a clear line of sight from executive strategy all the way down to your sprint level execution, making it easier to ensure that implementation activities remain aligned to your business outcomes that you're driving towards at the beginning throughout the life cycle of the project. Okay, I gave some examples, but these are so important. We want to walk through a few more and give you some references as you move forward in your organization and with your projects. We'll start with executive objectives, of course. They are connecting your Dynamics 365 implementation directly to your organization's strategic vision. They really define the why behind your investment. There are a lot of examples here on this slide. I'm not going to read through each one, but these are really to be used as a reference when you're drafting your own objectives. To highlight just one, if we take something like accelerating the global financial close, notice how this example doesn't just state an intention like improve finance operations. It clearly defines the business outcome we're trying to achieve, the measurable improvement we're targeting, and how that outcome is enabled through our Dynamics 365 implementation. Strong executive objectives should be business focused, measurable whenever possible, and again, tied directly to real strategic priorities. So as you move into defining your own objectives, again, use this slide as a reference, as a guide for how to structure them in a way that connects your technology implementation to meaningful business transformation outcomes. Next, we'll go into our project objectives. These, again, are objectives that take high-level executive objectives and translate them into measurable outcomes for a specific Dynamics 365 workstream or functional area. This is where strategy really starts to turn into implementation scope. Again, several examples here. These are just to be used as models when you're drafting your own project level objectives. Let's take something like standardized opportunity management. Notice how this connects directly to a sales functional area and clearly defines what improvement we're looking for within that scope. It's not describing the feature we're deploying, it's describing a business capability we want to improve, along with an expected outcome like an increased forecast accuracy. Strong project objectives should be tied to a specific business process or functional domain, again, clearly mapping to those executive objectives, and define what success looks like for that portion of the implementation. As you move forward, we recommend using this again as a reference that can define well-scoped, functionally aligned outcomes that your delivery teams can actually design and build towards. If you're expecting more of the same, you're going to get it, but we're focusing now on the toll gate and program increment objectives. They define what the team is committing to deliver within a specific planning interval, maybe like the next 8 to 12-week period of the Dynamics 365 implementation. So this is where we move from implementation scope into implementation progress over time. Let's take one example, like completing order to cash end-to-end configuration. Notice how this describes a meaningful implementation milestone that moves a full business process closer to being production ready. It's not a technical task like configuring a form. It's a business-aligned outcome that represents real progress toward delivering project and executive level objectives. See what happens there? It ladders right up. Strong program increment objectives should define what capability will be delivered within the planning interval and how that delivery moves the implementation closer to measurable business value. As you're planning your own program increment objectives, use these examples again to guide you for how to frame commitments in terms of business-ready outcomes rather than individual configuration tasks. Okay, last one. Sprint objectives focus teams on specific achievable deliverables that can be completed within a single sprint, typically 1 to 3 weeks, and that advance the broader program increment goals. So this is where we move from planning milestones to actual execution work that moves the implementation forward. Let's take one of these examples, like configuring an automated vendor invoice approval workflow. Notice how this describes a concrete deliverable that can realistically be designed, built, and unit tested within a single sprint. It's still outcome focused, but at a level where delivery teams can directly own and complete the work within the iteration. Strong sprint objectives should define something tangible that advances a program increment objective and moves the broader project closer to delivering that business value that's aligned to our executive objectives. So as you're planning your sprint cycles, use these examples as a guide for framing your sprint commitments in terms of meaningful progress, not just completed configuration tasks. Okay, you've gotten a lot of information about objectives. Now I'm going to turn it over to Rachel, who will do the demonstration of the objectives in both Azure DevOps and Mavim. Rachel, over to you.
Thanks, Mandy. Okay, so I am here in my Azure DevOps environment that has been set up and configured with the default template for the Microsoft Business Process Catalog, and that's where I wanted to start today. And then I'll switch over and do a demonstration of the objectives tree and creating new objectives directly in the Mavim Improve portal. So I'm using the queries view. I have a simple query that I've created that has all of my work items that shows the hierarchy. And you'll notice I've got my business process catalog. If I was to scroll down, we'd see my deliverables and my success by design delivery plan as well. But we're going to be focusing in on the objectives tree. The executive folder, you'll notice, is kind of right at the top. And this gives you a nice clean folder where you can kind of keep track of those executive objectives. And then the second folder that you see here breaks down each of those functional areas. For this example, I'm going to drill down into the finance area, and then I'm going to use accounts payable as my example. So once you've found the folder that you want to create the objective for, the way that I like to do it, you can use the new button up at the top and then scroll down. Oops, this scroll bar is very touchy. You can scroll down and select the objective work item type. But what I like to do is use the ... on the folder where I'm going to create this particular objective. If you're using the backlogs, which is, and we'll talk more about the backlogs in one of our upcoming tech talks. You can also use the backlogs to do this. And the backlogs are nice because then you don't see all of the other folders for the other departments or functional areas. And most users will kind of operate and function in just one functional area. But what I'm going to do from this ... icon underneath accounts payable on the project folder is select the option to link to a new work item. This will open up a new dialog where I can actually create my objective. So here, the link type is going to be a child because I want to add the objective underneath this folder. And in my drop-down box for the objective type, I have chosen objective. You can actually just simply start to type in that field and it'll pop down. So you'll want to pay attention to that. And then you're ready to give your objective a title. So for my example, I am going to do an example here for reducing invoice process cycle time. So I'm going to paste that in here and click Add Link. Now it has created a new work item or a new objective for me, and I can go ahead and put the details of this particular work item into my project. So I'm going to go ahead and paste in a simple description here that I've prepared. And obviously you can be as detailed or as summarized as you want to be when you're creating these descriptions. I do have one field that looks like it's actually required in my Azure DevOps. I'm going to mark it right now as needs more work. There is also a field here with the objective type. In Azure DevOps, you can set this up to be a default so that it defaults in there automatically for you when you're in that particular folder. And you can continue to put as much detail in this. You could assign it to somebody. One of the things that we do typically recommend when you're using Azure DevOps to manage these is you can create links and relationships to the business processes that these are relevant to. Now, they do receive a link kind of by default through that area path. So all of the business processes that are related to accounts payable. But if you want to be more specific, you can use the add link and choose existing item. And then you could go search for that like invoice, suppliers, process, or whatever the name is of that particular process or scenario. Obviously I have a lot in here, but like if you know the name of the process that you're trying to relate to, you can quickly and easily select that from the drop-down box to create a relationship. I'm going to click cancel on that. But you can make as many different relationships as you want when you're creating these objectives, and just remember that you'll need to save and close your work. And so now if I rerun the query, you'll notice that that new objective has been created for me here directly in Azure DevOps. And if I were to go ahead and switch to like the backlog for accounts payable, and I need to update my view here, there you can see that objective folder has been created. I created it. Where did I create it? Under project, I thought. Well, I might not have all the column options configured correctly. That's okay. We'll be doing some more detailed another session that's like on the backlog configuration, and I'll make sure when we do that demonstration, you can see those details. So apologies about that. Now, what I want to do is I want to switch over to the Mavim Improve portal and do a quick demonstration for you of how to view and manage objectives directly from the Mavim Improve portal. When you're using both Azure DevOps and Mavim Improve or Mavim in your implementation, we would actually recommend that you configure and maintain your objectives directly in Mavim, and then the integration between Mavim and Azure DevOps would keep these in sync so that you're not manually creating those work items directly in your Azure DevOps project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the tree icon to open up the navigation and navigate down into my objectives tree. When you look at the objectives tree here, you'll notice it has the same structure and folders that we see in Azure DevOps. So for this example, I'm going to go down into customer experience and then customer service, and I'm going to create a new objective here underneath customer service. And for this example, I'll do a toll gate. So on the toll gate, when I'm hovered over that, I'm going to use the ... icon and select to add a child topic. This will open up a new dialog, and I'll need to select from the drop-down box the correct type of work item or topic that I need to create. And so in this case, I'm going to scroll down and select the objective BPC topic. And then in the name, I'm going to go ahead and create an objective here. So in this case, I'm going to say that we're configuring automated case routing for the top 3 case categories. And I'm going to click OK. So now you can see this new topic has been created. So I'm going to click on it and I'll close the tree. I'm going to go ahead and use the Create New Topic Description button to open up the word editor. And this will open up the details where I can now put in the details about my particular objective. One of the nice features inside of Mavim is that you can actually create templates and structures for these documents. In this case, we've started from a blank template, but if you have a specific way that your organization wants to, document and structure your objectives, you can go ahead and kind of create those templates. And we'll do a session later on that dives into a little bit more detail. So I'm just going to paste in a simple description here. Obviously, this is a very basic description. And apparently the text on my key was white, not black. So we'll update that so you can actually read it. But obviously you can be, again, as detailed or as summarized as you want to be when you're documenting these. And then when I close this Word document, it's automatically saved. And so if I come back to the Mavim Improve portal and I refresh my page, you'll now be able to see that topic description. If there are fields configured on your work item type, it looks like it maybe takes a second here. I might need to refresh it again. It will populate and you'll be able to see that description directly in here. Oh, and I am on the right one. It might take a minute or so for it to save back, but when we do refresh, that's when you'll be able to see that description in here. You'll also notice that we've got that relationships. Right now, there are no relationships, but if I wanted to create a relationship in Mavim and relate back to a specific business process or something like that, I can quickly and easily create that relationship, choose which type of relationship, and then in the topic field, I'll do a with what and select a topic here. You can actually navigate in the business process catalog hierarchy. So if I wanted to go relate this to the actual business process that this goes with or the specific deliverable that it goes with, I could quickly and easily navigate to that using that hierarchy. So This was all about case routing. And so that's part of my customer and employee service operations. And so I can go find that, and it's related to, say, routing rules in this case, and then I can click that check mark. So with that, that concludes what I wanted to demonstrate for you today and kind of show that process of being able to very quickly and easily create these objectives directly in either Azure DevOps or in the Mavim Improve portal, following those best practices that we follow with the Success by Design framework. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Mandy.
Thank you, Rachel. All right. Well, you've learned a lot of valuable information today. We also want you to be able to have resources to take away on top of the references and the guidance we've given you already. So we've prepared some links that are focused on the business process catalog related to objectives, as well as our Success by Design objective information. So you'll find those here, and we'll be providing the presentation as well as the recording on YouTube at some point very soon. So look for those. We also have our standard business process catalog resources. So those are there for you to access as well. Lastly, we want to invite you to join us for our next Tech Talk. We are here every Thursday at the same time. Our next one will be a deep dive on using the business process catalog hierarchy in the Microsoft Business Process Catalog. And again, next Thursday, April 23rd at 7 a.m. Pacific, we will be here, as well as 4 p.m. Pacific. And you can keep up with all the subsequent Tech Talks on our blog at the link shown on the screen. Lastly, your feedback is super important to us. So if you could take a moment to fill out our survey, we'll share that link, or Rachel's already shared that link in the Q&A panel. So please let us know how we can do better, things you want to see, and we look forward to your input. All right, we must have been clear as day on our content. So thank you so much for attending. We appreciate you coming and learning more about objectives and how important they are to our projects. We look forward to seeing you at the next Tech Talk. Thank you so much.